All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the July 2023 DAG monthly meeting. We'll be talking about the Bellwether District today. Please keep yourselves muted. It helps our audio quality all the way through. It's a big help for us. One DAG tradition that we're going to try and keep going here on Zoom is to introduce yourselves in the chat. So please give us a hello, who you are, and why you're here today in the chat, so we can learn a little more about the group that's with us. We're going to run through some announcements, some events, some things that are ongoing this morning. But if you have anything that you're working on, anything that you'd like to share with us, please drop it in that chat there, and I'll call on you to unmute and tell us a little bit about what you're working on. So let's start out with a few little DAG updates, DAG advocacy items. Couple quick ones. David, do you wanna jump in first and get us started?
Yes, yes, I'd be glad to do that. The City Historical Commission tomorrow, the full commission will review a proposal essentially from the City Health Department to build a new health clinic at Friends Hospital on Roosevelt Boulevard in the Northeast. The site selected for this health center requires the demolition of the 19th century superintendent's house, which stands on the lawn in front of the great complex of hospital buildings that is the National Historic Landmark as well as a city landmark. And the city maintains that there's no other possible place to build this. I would say on the face of it, that's a peculiar assertion, and the Preservation Alliance has asked for full documentation of the site selection process. It is a National Historic Landmark, the highest category of designation in the United States, and it's an item that I must say sort of slipped up on me quickly. I only became aware of this last week, but it's certainly something we're keeping an eye on.
Thank you. Can you drop a link in the chat for?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to find it. Basically, you have to go to the Historical Commission website and look at their agenda items. And I can't find a visual. That's the house that I'm showing right now. The main hospital building is behind it on the right, so it stands right on Roosevelt Boulevard, and with the lawn of the hospital behind it. Among other things, it would be probably possible to build this clinic building right behind the house without destroying the house. So there are a variety of other issues here. Anyway, that's a thing to keep. But if you go to the Historical Commission website, you can find the agenda. I couldn't find any visuals easily available. That's why I'm showing it in Google Street View. But I'll see if I can do better in the meantime and drop it if I find it.
Appreciate you sharing that, David.
Yeah.
George Claflin, coming your way. I know you had a couple things you wanted to share with us.
Yes, I'm sorry. I've had a terrible time because it's demanding update and the software, and I haven't been able to do that because of some problems here. I have three items quickly. I think I've got through Andrew Stein's able assistance. I have access now, although the picture's not so hot of me. Three things. One is everyone, I hope, is aware that White Marsh Hall in Cheltenham Township has been sold. This is one of the last of the great Robert Barron mansions, and it's in actually a neighborhood of mansions, one of which has already been restored. And the group that now is about to own it will be attempting to restore it. So keep your eye on that project.
There's a website, linwoodhallpreservation.org, for people who are interested.
I'm going to attempt to share the screen and hope that certain things have not dropped off in the meantime.
George, do you want to show Payne Plaza? I've got that too, if you'd like.
Okay, I've got Payne Plaza is queued up.
Okay.
I think that is sharing now. I had Inga's article on bus apocalypse, and I can't bring it up quickly now. I may be able to bring it up later, but the second item was without the public knowing much about it, the Greyhound bus terminal is now being handled as a street bus terminal, along with two other bus companies at between 6th and 7th on Market Street, and it's a total disaster. The long haul buses interfere with the city buses, and it's an indication, I think, that merits some action by DAG, in the sense that the streets department, without proper guidance from above and without proper guidance of a planning nature, has allowed this to happen. There was an excellent scheme, which the article does have a picture of, I think Inga's article, of a bus station plan for the North Plaza at 30th Street, just north of the station, where there's now a surface parking lot. This is an example of inattention to planning by the city, I think, and we'd certainly be looking for people to help us write a piece on that. But because the time is so limited, I'm going to go right into the Payne Plaza. That's the third item. The drawings for Payne Plaza have just been announced because they're now going to the Art Commission. And I'm going to go very quickly through them because this is not the time for an extensive review, but you should be aware of it. There's the plan. That's the MSB building, is the white cruciform to the left of that drawing, and JFK Boulevard is at the bottom, Art Street at the top, and Broad Street at the right. As you can see, it introduces a diagonal. The 14 there is a sunken plaza that you're all familiar with, probably along Broad Street. I'm going to go very quickly here, and then there'll be time for maybe just a couple of comments. There's the view of the Lifshitz sculpture and City Hall in the background. There's a very nice night drawing here, and I'm going to put that up. There's a rendition of the lighting concept, and then I'll go to one last drawing and maybe call on David for to start some comments.
Right. So let me just say, I mean, I think this is the work of Ground Reconsidered. This is their proposal. Among the features that are really very attractive is the astonishing increase in shade coverage. To make that possible, they raise the plaza height about a foot or a little more than a foot through much of it in order to create planting depth. The bunch of trees on the right side that you see here the ground is covered with gravel. It's intended as a shady sitting area, a bosque they call it. There are several places where they propose to build shade roofs to shelter areas. There is an enormous quantity of increased seating, places, tables, and chairs for outdoor seating. If you know the situation at the so-called porch at 30th Street Station, same architect, same idea, lots of portable seating. I think in our current emptying out of office spaces, when there is a question of how many chairs you need, but that otherwise, I think it's a very handsome thing. The introduction of the diagonal, they say, is justified by the fact that the new group of trees on the diagonal faces City Hall Tower. It's obviously an interesting geometric addition. Frankly, I think the idea that the group of trees want to watch City Hall Tower is at least smile worthy, but it is a strong design feature. It does increase much more up and down. There's more variation in height as you go across. It'll be more like a landscape. And given the fact that we just reduced the amount of ground level variation at Love Park and at Dilworth Plaza, that's sort of interesting. We're putting back in something of that now. But all in all, I think it's a very interesting, strong design. And what's the price? It's $20 million, 20 million, something like that.
Yeah, they indicate a budget of 20 million. I should also mention that SMP, or the Associated Architects, and the Bosque of Trees is not that far off from where Viridian Landscape Design had installed a temporary farm a few years ago. That was a temporary project.
Yeah.
So what are the next steps on this? Are there any public hearings or any other upcoming meetings?
Well, the Art Commission will be a public hearing, and I will put the link to the documents in the chat, but they think they're done. They had apparently an extensive participation process, and they're going into working drawings now, and they're planning to start construction in May of 2024. So they're doing the working drawings basically now, and in the spring they'll be doing the bidding and procurement, hoping to start in May.
Yeah, Andy Toy notes that the sunken area is not part of this project. That's to the right of this rendering that you see here. It is supposed to be part of a second phase, and my general rule of second phases is that they aren't phases. But that is the case here.
Yeah, although I am very pleased with the large percent for art appropriation, rather than an independent sculpture, as was indicated, I suggest an artist design canopy. That's a element with a very large presence, seating elements or artist participation on the creative team to design more of a functional components of the plaza.
Yeah, that stippled circle at the lower right is the rendering version of one of the canopies that is proposed.
Yeah, I think it could. I think the creative input of an artist would be appropriate. The government of the people is so overwhelmingly monumental and powerful and tends to dwarf any other sculpture in its presence. So I would suggest integrating the artist's input for the percent for art into these other elements.
Well, thank you for bringing that to our attention. Kat dropped the Billy Penn link in the chat there about the removal of the Your Move art pieces there, so you can follow up with that. I want to keep us moving today because we do have a lot to cover. So Marcia, can I pass it to you to intro our next meeting here at DAG?
Sure, thanks Eli, and hi everyone again. Next month's program focuses on the FDR Park in South Philly, not far from Hilco's Bellwether District. Justin DeBarandinas, the park's dynamic new director, will be highlighting immigrant groups at FDR, community empowerment in public space, and a specific look at the amazing success of the Southeast Asian market with its native cuisine dishes and cooked by entrepreneurs speaking multiple languages. I've been there, and if you haven't, you really should go. FDR Park itself is considered to be a national leading example of cultural preservation and inclusion in public space. And there will also be an opportunity to address the controversy over the redesign of the park on the same morning. So join us on Thursday, August 24th at 10 a.m. See ya.
That will be up on our website in the next few days, so you'll see that on there, and we will also make sure to get you plenty of links through our e-blast. The last thing that I wanted to talk about before we get into our program is the DAG reading list. I'll throw a link in the chat, but we've added a tab on our website with people you should follow, books you should read, handles you should follow, just as an opportunity to increase the education of our website and make it a place to go when you're looking for more information and more ways to get involved. So thank you, Nika, for dropping that there. If there is anything we're missing, anything we should add, email Nika at dagfellow@gmail.com with your recommendations, and we'll keep that updated, and that'll be a living document so we can continue to provide some interesting folks to follow there. So with that, let's jump into the meat of our meeting today. We're going to talk about the Bellwether District. I'm very appreciative of Hilco for joining us today to talk about the former PES refinery, a 1,300-acre campus focusing on e-commerce, life sciences, logistics, and innovation leadership. This is what HRP does nationally, reimagining complex properties across the U.S. And utilizing a holistic approach to remediate and redevelop sites for the future. I'm going to pass it over to, before I pass it over to Mia Fioravanti, we will have a Q&A. Please put all of your questions into the chat as you have them. We'll make sure to get to as many of them as we possibly can. So please keep that going while we go through our presentation. But I want to thank Mia for helping us to pull this together. Mia Fioravanti joined HRP in November of 2021 as the Vice President of Corporate Affairs for the Bellwether District, and she oversees the company's Philadelphia-focused community outreach and workforce development efforts. So Mia, I'm going to pass it to you. I'm going to pass the screen share to you and let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Eli. Christina from our team, can you help me share the presentation? Thank you so much. So thank you, Eli, and thanks to Design Advocacy Group for hosting us today. As Eli shared, my name is Mia Fioravanti. I'm on the corporate affairs team at the Bellwether District. Again, responsible for our community relations, philanthropic work, and economic inclusion efforts here in Philadelphia for the Bellwether District project. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with Hilco Redevelopment Partners or HRP, our focus nationally is on redeveloping what are often obsolete industrial sites into job-creating economic engines in our project cities. Our largest project and our only project in Philadelphia is transforming what was once a 150-year-old oil refinery in South Philadelphia, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, into an innovation and logistics hub that will create an estimated 19,000 permanent jobs and 28,000 construction positions over the course of the development. We are 2 years into a 15-year project redeveloping the 1,300-acre site, and we're very excited to be here to talk to you about it today. Christina, if you go to the next slide. Great, thank you. During our presentation, you'll hear updates on our demolition process. You'll hear from our in-house environmental remediation team, from both our industrial and mixed-use development teams. And last, I'll provide an update on our community and workforce development efforts. Next slide. Great. So to start, I just wanted to share a quick overview of HRP's commitments or investments on the Bellwether District project and how that translates to benefits for our city and region. Over the course of the project, $4 billion will be invested in the cleanup and redevelopment of the site. We project $100 million in annual tax revenue for the city and $120 million in annual tax revenue for the state on an ongoing basis. And as part of our commitment, we're making a number of community and workforce investments, including, but not limited to, scholarship funding, internship and career awareness opportunities for students, and pre-apprenticeship program support. As I shared, thank you, as I shared, we'll also make significant investments in reconnecting the site to the neighboring community, investing in LEED certified buildings and other green infrastructure, and of course, demolishing and cleaning up the former refinery site. Next slide, Christina. Thank you. We also just want to remind everyone of our current project timeline, which you'll hear more about from our development team in just a bit. You'll see here we're wrapping up demolition work and moving into our first phase of vertical development. On the industrial portion of the campus, earthwork has begun on the site, and we expect vertical construction to begin in the fourth quarter of this year. On the innovation campus on the northern portion of the site, we expect earthwork to begin in the fourth quarter of 2023, and vertical construction to begin in the third quarter of 2024. Next slide. So with that, I'll turn things over to our SVP of Operations, Stephanie Eggert, to provide an update on our demolition work.
Thank you, Mia. So I wanted to talk a little bit about where we are with the demolition. And thank you, Christina. This is a bit of a helicopter view or high level view of the site. The top photo was taken a few years ago, and the bottom photo is, really just a few months ago. And what we've done here is when we purchased the facility in June of 2020, we immediately started on the activities associated with the pre-activities to the facility demolition. So that included asbestos abatement and a large amount of decommissioning, which really is removing the legacy petroleum product from the above ground infrastructure that you see here. And so we got started on the demolition exercise really around this early 2021 timeframe, and over the course of the last few years have largely completed the demolition on site. We have removed the overwhelming majority of the inherited petroleum product, and we are proud to say that we're nearing completion on this demolition scope and beginning to move into the next phase of our efforts here on the development side. And so with that, I will turn it over to Juliana Conley to talk through the environmental remediation efforts.
Thanks, Stephanie. And Christina, you can go to the next slide. I'll just give a quick summary of the environmental remediation work that we've been up to. I think perhaps unsurprisingly, this is quite contaminated property after its over 100-year use as an oil refinery. So there's a lot of work going on, and I know that's not really the focus of this topic, but just to give you guys a sense of what we're up to. One of the things we spend a lot of time is cleaning up oil that was spilled to the ground during the refinery's operation. So this is like very active implementation of remediation systems to pull that oil that's still present in its liquid phase out of the ground to the extent that we can. Another thing that we spend a lot of time on has to do with sampling the soil in anticipation of earthwork. So you'll hear later from my colleagues Amanda and Kurt about the grading that is necessary at this site to get the property to the appropriate elevations for development, primarily related to flood hazard implications near the river. So in order to do that, we need to move a lot of soil around. And this soil is contaminated because of the site's history. And so what we have committed to do prior to our ownership of the site is sample all of that soil before we move it so that we can make sure that the soil ends up in a location that will be appropriate for its final use. Another thing we spend a lot of time on, and those of you that drive by the property may see this, is there were over 100 huge above ground storage tanks on the property. It's sort of hard to even understand the size of them if you're not used to looking at these structures. And as those tanks come down, there's regulatory obligations to sample beneath them to look for contamination that may not have been sort of knowable while they were in place. So we do a lot of sampling related to that. And if we find contamination beneath those tanks, implement remedial actions to address those. And I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Amanda Macy.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Amanda Macy, and I'm part of the mixed use development team here at HRP. And we're excited to share with you our in-progress plans for the first phases of redevelopment at the Bellwether District. Next slide. As you know, HRP purchased the site in 2020 and began the enormous undertaking of decommissioning and deconstructing the oil refinery. As you heard a moment ago, the work is nearing completion, which allows us to focus on increasingly on the future transformation of the site. As an oil refinery, the site was home to one employer in a single industry, but in the future, the site will be home to dozens of employers in a wide range of industries, from logistics and distribution to light manufacturing to research and development. This will provide more diverse and resilient employment opportunities to Philadelphians across a broad spectrum of professions and contribute significantly to the economic development of the region. Next. Today, you'll hear more about the two sides of the campus we're planning and the first phase of development on each side. The innovation area to the north of Passyunk Avenue is anticipated to house approximately 3 to 4 million square feet of life science, biomanufacturing, pharmaceutical, and other innovative uses that build upon Philadelphia's world-class academic institutions and position as a global leader in cell and gene therapy. Over time, it's estimated that this area could be home to 8,500 jobs in these growing industries. The industrial and logistics area to the south of Passyunk could support over 10 million square feet of modern warehousing, distribution, light manufacturing facilities, leveraging Philadelphia's prime location on the eastern seaboard and bringing over 10,000 new jobs to the city. Next slide. As we tackle the significant task of redeveloping this site, we've identified 3 principles to guide our physical planning. The first principle is to reintegrate the site. Having been an oil refinery for well over a century, the site was fenced off from the surrounding community and functioned as a bit of an island in South Philadelphia. In many ways, the city grew up around the site with few points of connection, either through or to the oil refinery. The challenge now is how to reintegrate it into the city in a thoughtful way while we contend with the Schuylkill River, which forms a natural barrier on one side, and I-76, which forms a man-made barrier on the other. The second principle is to create green pathways. As we build these new connections, using the city's complete streets and other guidelines to inform our site designs, we have an opportunity to create new welcoming and green sidewalks and cycle paths within the district. And the last principle is to create a sustainable district. As we design and construct new streets, buildings, and other site elements, we're incorporating a variety of strategies to reduce carbon emissions, increase resilience to climate change, and encourage the use of renewable energy. Even though we're early in the project, these strategies are already being incorporated and will continue to be developed as the project makes progress. Next slide. So diving in further into our first project goal, reintegrate the site. As I said before, the city has really grown up around our site and created a large void. So our first challenge is how to reintegrate and tie back into the city fabric and create new access points and connections for vehicular, bike, and pedestrian access. Next slide. This slide illustrates the existing street network. We are surrounded by key access points, I-76, Passyunk Ave, 26th Street, and Penrose Ave. And our next step is to identify how we can make key connections and how visitors will access our internal circulation network in the future. Next slide. This slide shows the initial internal framework of our primary access routes internal to our site in red. There are key north-south circulation routes that will tie into the existing road network, and there will also be secondary roads, but this plan only shows our primary connection points. Next slide. We're also planning for bike and pedestrian connections through the site. We will connect into the existing north-south network and plug into Grays Ferry Avenue, 34th Street to the north, and Penrose Avenue to the south. Next slide. Existing SEPTA routes. So we are currently coordinating with SEPTA to identify opportunities to extend services and bring new services to the site, which will happen over time in a phased manner. Next slide. Create green pathways. So our second goal looks at how we create green pathways through the site. How can we create a green network that is safe, multimodal, and uses landscaping in order to create open spaces with enjoyable pedestrian experiences and uses stormwater management through landscape and green infrastructure. Next slide. This map illustrates a future connection through the site that will provide a safe bike and pedestrian connection and will help to weave the city's adjacent active spaces together up from Pennovation to the north down to FDR Park in the south. And then next, I'm going to hand it over to Kurt to take us through the next few slides.
Great. Thanks, Amanda. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to wrap up the project goals here and then get into some of the industrial development. I do serve as Vice President on the industrial development team here at the Bellwether District. So to start with these goals, essentially we've highlighted 6 main goals under the Sustainable District major goal. The first, believe it or not, we're actually already completed. So just by closing the refinery and working through the demolition of a lot of the processing units that were here under the former use, we have reduced the emissions in Philadelphia by approximately 16%. The next 5 goals are really aspirational goals as we move through the program. The very first is bringing the entire site up out of the 100-year floodplain. So within that goal, really we're repurposing soils on site and trying to maintain a net balance as we undertake this first earthwork phase and as we go through subsequent earthwork phases. The second goal there is to raise all the building pads out of the 500-year floodplain. So as people get a little bit more into sea level rise and things of that nature, we really think that that 500-year floodplain target for all the buildings is going to be a good sustainable one going forward. As we look to get into the buildings, we are looking at LEED certifiable new buildings. This would be in both portions of the campus. And we're excited to undertake a lot of the underlying issues as it relates to LEED to make sure that we're positioning these buildings to be really cutting edge going forward. Finally, getting into a lot of the solar PV and electric infrastructure topics. On the industrial side especially, we're having very large footprint buildings down in that area that are lending themselves to having quite a bit of solar roofing as we work through this program. So we do think there's a definite opportunity there to not only have solar PV, but also use that solar PV to help tenants in the final use really be able to have all the tools in their toolbox to be able to go to EVs, whether it's for fleet or for the personally operated vehicles for people that will be in those buildings. And finally, we think that by having a lot of the EV infrastructure on site and working through a lot of the LEED certifiable building topics, that will reduce the use of fossil fuels as we work through this program. Next slide, Christina. So this is just a little bit more detail on these initiatives. Like we said, we're looking through a lot of state-of-the-art, not only electric PV on rooftops, but also the solar ready facilities. So, that may include not only the solar panels, but also potentially battery assets so that if we do have good peak sun days, we have the ability to store those electrons on site and then use them at later times or other days when the sun may not be as readily available. The next is, as Amanda had touched on briefly, having that extensive landscaping plan with bioswales to not only help with some types of constituent removal, things like that for the stormwater. We think that a lot of those landscaping areas will definitely help the overall sustainability initiatives. Third, like I had mentioned before, trying to get everything up out of those FEMA base flood elevations, at least 100-year storm for the entire site. And that would really be the roads, parking areas, things like that. And then the 500-year for the building pads. And then getting to the fourth point, really providing all these tenants, whether it be build to suit or speculative builds, with the ability to get those buildings LEED certified and make sure that we are encouraging all future tenants to go a LEED certifiable route. And then finally, with such a big property, there will be thousands of plantings going across the entire 1,300 acre property. And really, I think it's going to be thousands of plantings in each kind of sub portion. So that would include innovation and the industrial campus. Next slide, Christina. So getting back to some of this flood mitigation, we did start that CLOMAR process with FEMA over 2 years ago now. So during that, we did study about 9.5 miles of the Schuylkill River. That included 17 bridge structures and over 17.5 square miles of that really contributing drainage area. So all that area, that 1,900 square miles, as you can see up in the yellow, is really that collection basin down to our study point, and that's representative of over 92,000 football fields. So that's a good takeaway for folks who may not be as familiar with square miles. Next slide. So as you get to the site, I'll start with the map here. What we've demarked in red on the exhibit is really where the existing 100-year floodplain existed on the site. And then through that Clomar process, what we have here is looking at some of those higher lying areas. Those would generally be our targeted areas for cuts. And then in the red areas, those would be the targeted areas for fills. So as I stated before, the goal is to be at a balanced earthwork program so that every cubic yard from a high-lying area of the site would be able to go to a low-lying area of the site, allowing us to manage all the soils on site that Juliana had touched on earlier that were pre-characterized. So those would be able to stay within the bounds of the site and help us achieve those goals to be able to have everything above the 100-year floodplain and buildings out of the 500-year floodplain. And then the one adder here is by adding all the new drainage infrastructure, including the piping network, swales, and retention basins, we do think that a lot of the stormwater is going to be much better managed under the new program than what was here existing. Next slide. So now we're going to touch on some of the industrial development concepts early on, and we can hit the next slide, Christina. So just circling back to the schedule quick, as you can see, we did already start earthwork. That was back in the end of May. And then we're anticipating a vertical construction start on the first building in Q4 2023, and looking at that going approximately a year before that would be ready for certificate of occupancy. We are building this first building on a speculative basis, so we do not have a tenant in mind yet for this building, but we're hopeful one may come along through the process. Next slide, Christina. So this gives you a good representation of the industrial portion of the site's current concept plan. What you can see in the blue dotted line is where we intend to start. So this first phase is comprised of 2 buildings. The southern building is what we're calling Lot 15, and that's about a 326,000 square foot dual or multi-dock building with additional truck parking and employee parking. Then a little bit further to the north, you have Lot 16, which is going to be anywhere between a 702,000 and a 727,000 square foot building. Right now, we're evaluating some optionality so that if that building was to go to a dual tenant setup, there may be some slight changes to this layout. Next slide. So here's a closer look at Lot 15, a little bit easier to see here at this smaller scale. So as discussed, this is about a 326,000 square foot building. We will have, in the neighborhood of about 130 trailer parking spaces. And the goal there is to help prospective tenants manage that overflow truck parking on their site, and then give them optionality in their logistics and supply chain networks to make sure they're being as efficient as possible. And then over on the left side of the building, you can see we're programming just over 160 employee parking spaces for more of the POV vehicles for employees that'll actually be working in the building itself. Next slide. Then we get up to the north. So this representation is the dual tenant representation. So you can see the split parking, technically north and south. This representation is oriented a little bit different than as it is on the actual site. So we are showing a little over 725,000 square feet. This building would have just over 180 additional trailer parking spaces. And then we're just under 500 employee parking spaces for the folks that would be working in the building. Next slide. And I'm going to hand it back over to Amanda to give you a rundown on innovation.
Awesome, thank you. Next slide. So phase 1 of the innovation campus follows industrial by approximately 6 months. So we're planning to begin earthwork at the end of this year, with vertical construction starting approximately 6 to 9 months later in Q3 2024. And vertical construction will last approximately 12 months and will conclude in Q3 2025 for our phase 1. Next slide. So to recap, phase 1 of the innovation campus is located north of Passyunk, directly between the Schuylkill River and I-76. It connects to Pennovation and University of Pennsylvania's campus directly north via 34th Street. And we chose this as our first phase because it's closest to the existing infrastructure and the surrounding neighborhoods. It's approximately 40 acres, and our first phase is approximately 500,000 square feet and 3 buildings. These first 3 buildings are designed to accommodate biomanufacturing, processing, and production facilities, along with tech-oriented uses. Next slide. So zooming in further, here's more detail on our phase 1 design and a few early initial renderings. As I said, the first 3 buildings will range in size, totaling approximately 500,000 square feet, but the individual buildings will range from 150 to 180,000 square feet. They will have large open floor plans with 40-foot clear interior ceiling heights. We're very focused on an urban campus feel with attention to lots of landscaping, central courtyards, dedicated bike lanes, protected sidewalks, and on-street parking. The buildings will have a highly designed exterior with a mix of glass and metal panel. And additionally, building B in the center will contain campus amenity space with a fitness center, conference rooms, and a cafe. And then I think, Mia, it's back to you.
Okay, hi. Christina, you can go to the next slide. So I'm going to provide a quick snapshot of some of our workforce development and community initiatives. On the workforce side, we've invested in a number of workforce programs and partnerships that will help train and prepare local Philadelphians for jobs that we create both now and in the future. I'll just name a few of our partnerships. We have a partnership with the Philadelphia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce's Build Latino program. And through that program, we're helping small Hispanic and Latino-owned construction companies scale their businesses over time. We're also a lead sponsor of Everybody Builds, which is a collaboration between multiple large developers in the city who are collectively committed to growing a more diverse pipeline of workers in the construction industry. Because the jobs that we'll create in the near term are construction-focused jobs, we're invested in several pre-apprenticeship programs through which we're preparing students for careers in the building trades. So for example, we have a really great partnership with the Carpenter's Apprentice Ready program, or CARP. We serve as their toolbox partner, which means that we're providing CARP participants with a toolbox upon graduating. We have 2 partnerships focused on providing employment opportunities to returning citizens, one with the Center for Employment Opportunities and one with Mural Arts' Restorative Justice program. We also have a really comprehensive, what we call our Career Connected Learning program, and we run that in partnership with the School District of Philadelphia. And through that, we're providing learning opportunities to students, to district students in the form of internships and job shadowing opportunities and pre-apprenticeship training. And actually, at the moment, we're currently employing 30 young people as interns, either at the Bellwether District or with one of our partner employers this summer. And last, we're a sponsor and partner of MyWick, which is a free construction-focused day camp for 7th through 12th grade girls. And so last summer and again this summer, we hosted approximately 30 young women from MyWick at our site for a tour and a preview of our future development. So again, this kind of focus on workforce development and economic inclusion will evolve as the project evolves, but this is a good snapshot of some of our current investments. Christina, if you go to the next slide. Great, thank you. And overall, I would just say we're continually focused on listening to and engaging with our neighbors with a specific focus on South and Southwest Philadelphia residents. We hold quarterly public meetings as well as bi-monthly meetings with our community advisory panel, or our CAP. That group is made up of 25 registered community organizations and other key stakeholders that really represent the South and Southwest communities and serve as our eyes and ears in the community. This is in addition to kind of smaller engagements throughout the year. So for example, we held a run of small focus group meetings in the spring, and we're going to continue that work in the fall. We conduct an annual survey, and then we share information regularly through our quarterly newsletter, social media, and of course on our website. And as far as some of our investments, we have a partnership with the Community College of Philadelphia. That's a long-standing partnership through which we're providing $250,000 in scholarships to residents living in our zip codes of focus in South and Southwest. We hold an annual turkey distribution event through which we distribute 1,000 turkeys each year to families throughout the city. And we hold and sponsor a number of community events throughout the year. So notably, last year we held our first community health fair, during which we partnered with health organizations and vendors to provide resources to community members. And then this past winter, we also partnered with 10 community organizations to distribute 1,000 youth-sized coats to community members. I think I want to touch on this, especially because I've seen some questions coming up in the chat about it. We have formally committed to a community benefits agreement, or CBA. We officially launched that process in April, and meetings are ongoing. And we hope to have our completed CBA in the first quarter of 2024. So while we're early in the process, we will continue to provide updates on that process during our regularly scheduled public meetings. Christina, can you go to the next slide? Thanks. Also just want to share a few recent updates. So our employees take part in regular volunteering. This slide is showing a recent cleanup and beautification project that we did in Finnegan Playground and Grace Ferry. During that event, we partnered with local organizations, including several members of our CAP. We painted Finnegan Playground Community Center, planted new plantings and flowers, and picked up litter around the park. Next slide, Christina. On the same day, we announced a series of donations to environmental organizations as part of our new Touchdown for Sustainability program, which we did in partnership with the Eagles. And through that partnership, we committed funding for each touchdown that the Eagles made this past season. So through that program, we were able to contribute 3 $25,000 donations, $75,000 in total, to 3 recipients, which you see listed here. Next slide. And last, I just want to share that some recent activity from our team. We've been kind of out and about in the community this past quarter at a number of events you see here. And again, a lot of that work has been focused on engaging students in preparation for our summer internship program and career awareness events. Next. Great. This is our final slide, and we're happy to open it up for Q&A. Sharing my contact information here. Please reach out to me if you have any questions. Again, we're going to try and get through as many of your questions as we can. But if we don't get to your questions today, please do follow up with me via email. Thank you.
Thank you, Mia. Excuse me, and thank you to the Hilco team. We do have a lot of good questions coming in here, so I will jump right in with what is the flood impact on surrounding communities of raising the site? There was a lot of talk about the benefits to the site of raising and releveling things, but how have you studied the adjacent communities and the impact on them from raising the site?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we did the FEMA study that we undertook was both sides of the river. It was focused more on those immediate impacts of both banks of the river, but there were minimal to no impacts on our proposed project. So, essentially it's minimal impacts would also be further outside of that study area. And that's kind of the overall feedback that we received from that FEMA study that was provided to the city floodplain manager.
So another question that came up a number of times was, again, about what is being brought onto the site. You mentioned the reduction in emissions with the plant closing or with the refinery closing, but you're bringing a lot of new emissions on with a lot of tractor trailer use. And for something that is an innovation campus, I think folks are looking to hear more about how you're going to reduce fossil fuels, not just as an aspirational goal, but what concrete plans you have to reduce fossil fuels and fossil fuel use.
Yep. And it's, I think a lot of that is going to be somewhat market driven. So in our position, by going through and having a lot of the EV vehicles and having a lot of we're doing a lot of studies behind the scenes right now on microgrid and sustainable energy district type options for the entire site. So as we see more of these EVs kind of getting into the overall economy and that logistics and supply chain network, we think a lot of that would follow suit. So like we said, there's a push to provide everybody, future tenants, with some of those EV capabilities. And then it's just, really where the market goes. We're going to try to be responsive to that and encourage folks to go that direction. In terms of the buildings themselves, they are still under design. So, while we aren't committing to no fossil fuels in the buildings, we are evaluating things more electrified and things that have a reduced footprint in the buildings themselves from a kind of an HVAC perspective.
Yeah, I think that is a significant question and concern that has come up. Someone cited that Prologis has committed to being, what do we have here, carbon neutral construction by 2025 and net zero operations by 2030. And as logistics become such an essential piece of the puzzle, moving that in a positive direction with commitments is something that a lot of folks on here are looking for as I'm scrolling through a number of questions. And so I guess, is there a timeline where you feel that you'll have more of an understanding and be able to make more formal commitments about your plans?
Potentially. I think today there's not a firm timeline on that. I do know that, through studying this sustainable energy district on site, we do have the ability to put in enough solar to where a lot of things at a base level can be covered by the solar generation. I know that comes with a lot of different ebbs and flows in terms of how much we're actually producing. A lot of it is contingent on the weather, but that's where trying to kind of stitch all these items together to make sure that we have the ability to generate the solar, we have the ability to store what we generated from the solar that isn't maybe directly used, and then be able to repurpose that into the system. That's really how we're looking at trying to end up being greener than the grid. And I think as we go through this design and we get more finality around how those components are going to come together, that we'll be able to reevaluate those types of more definitive statements in the future.
So one that maybe was less of a question and more of a comment, and one that I certainly can echo in my professional practice, is that saying that buildings are LEED certifiable or some version of certifiable doesn't yield great results. Saying they need to be certified, whether it's LEED or Green Globes or WELL or other systems, will lead to the results that folks need. And I think there's just an urging that commitment is made, because if they are certifiable, then they should go the extra mile and receive that certification in order to make sure not just the design and documentation, but the actual construction meets those aspirations.
Yeah, and so for us right now, where we're at in this kind of overall conceptual program, because we are still doing speculative buildings at this point in time, from the owner's position, we're trying to make those buildings LEED certifiable in a lot of those items that would get points under the LEED system as we build that speculative building. And then ultimately, depending on the tenants who may sign up for those spaces, that's where a lot of the downstream items would come in to get to, you know, a level of LEED that's appropriate for their business plan. So, you know, we've seen folks in the past kind of be LEED silver focused. You have other folks that have much higher goals and want to be in more of that, you know, LEED platinum type situation. So for us, it's making sure that from a site work and building envelope perspective, that we're not sacrificing any of those LEED points early in the program, and then being in a position to be able to transact to some of those higher LEED certifications whenever we do have that final tenant for those structures.
Yeah, I think, you know, with modern building codes, you know, often even using LEED silver as a baseline these days, pushing for something much higher than that, you know, for such a significant development, I think is a definite need and a goal to aspire to, because, you know, LEED silver, especially on a redeveloped site, is you know, should be a pretty baseline availability as a certification. So, you know, I think a lot of folks on here, I see some nods, are thinking that there is a next level that really should be pushed for to create an innovation campus that is truly sustainable. I want to ask a question about infrastructure. So our infrastructure, roadways, improvements being planned, including widening of roads to handle the increased truck traffic, specifically the intersection of Penrose, Plattbridge, and 26th Street, which has been a nightmare for motorists for years.
Yeah, we agree, and I can tell you personally, I sit in that traffic both directions almost every day. So we do have significant offsite improvements that we've been working through, and we've been working through a TIS. I think we're up to cycle 9 now, that not only includes significant improvements out on 26th Street. So really, we're looking at a new intersection at 26 and Hartranft with widenings, additional turning movements, additional travel lanes, and a new fully lit and stoplight controlled intersection. We're also looking at similar improvements down at the 26th and Penrose intersection. There's an existing connection today that's right around Penrose and Lanier. We're also evaluating that intersection for upgrades. And then further to the north, we're looking at upgrades at 26th and 28th and Passyunk, and then also up on Vare and Maiden adjacent to the innovation campus. So there is quite a bit of study that has gone on, and we're anticipating a lot of those improvements will be done within the phasing of the overall site delivery.
So I wanted to change topics a little bit onto some of the community workforce development and who's getting these jobs. So how are you guaranteeing that a lot of this job creation is going to folks who are currently in the region and are not going to bring in a significant new workforce to displace longtime residents? And also, you know, you mentioned there's a number of $500,000, which is a very small number relative to total site investment. So is there an overall goal for what you're trying to invest in community workforce development?
Sure. Excuse me, I'll take that one. So I would just say, you know, as a company and certainly at the project level, we're committed to equity and inclusion. And as part of our commitment, we have developed economic opportunity and workforce inclusion goals in partnership with the city in the form of an EOP. So on the contract side, our goal is to achieve 50% or higher MBE, 50% or higher local participation, and 5 to 8% or higher WBE participation in our construction and professional services contracts. On the workforce side, our goal is to engage 50% people of color and 50% local residents in our workforce opportunities. You know, I will share that we're early on in the project. As we stated, we're about to move into vertical construction, which will significantly impact these goals and measurements. And so, you know, I will just say our plan is that we will provide an update on our progress towards meeting these goals at an upcoming meeting. But additionally, it is a huge imperative and priority for us as a company, and in working with our general contractors and other partners who are, hiring people to work on the project. These goals are written into their contracts, and they certainly know from us that they're a priority. So I will say that work is ongoing, but a huge area of focus.
So we've got a few questions about the most energy efficient forms of transport being shipping and then rail. Given the access to water, are there plans for docks? Are there existing docks? Are there any plans to provide shipping connections for some of these sites to avoid some of the need for all of the truck traffic?
Yeah, it's a great question on both fronts. So we have some waterfront access. It is all the way down at the southernmost extent of the site. That channel, while today doesn't really facilitate ocean-going vessels, there are possibilities that it could in the future. It would take relatively significant capital investment to get there, but it is actually being studied currently. And then similarly with the rail, we do have connection to CSX and Conrail on the site. They are at different places, but we're also evaluating those potential opportunities. And we've been in contact with both of the rail providers about folks and tenants who may be interested in their services. So they are, both things that are under evaluation as the overall concept of the park comes together.
Sorry,
go ahead.
we have a couple of members of our team that need to drop. So I just wanted to share that we'll answer maybe one or two more questions, and then we might have to answer the rest as a follow-up to this meeting.
Yeah, and I think it probably makes sense that we can compile the chat into a document and share it with you, and then we'll publish that document on our website once you have a chance to work through it.
That sounds great.
Zhenya, you're my go-to on trails. You want to unmute and talk a little bit about trail connections, bike connections, and so forth?
Sure, thanks, Eli. Yeah, I just had a question specifically regarding, I don't know how familiar the Hilco folks are with the Circuit Trails Network or the Schuylkill River Trail in particular. I'm sure you're pretty familiar with the Schuylkill River Trail, and this is continuing to develop to the south. We're seeing work being done on the Grays Ferry Swing Bridge right now, which will connect you into Bartram's Garden right in the area, and eventually connect you all the way down to Fort Mifflin, and via the Forge to Refuge Trail, get you into the John Hines. And so, we know many people use the Schuylkill River Trail for recreation, but also for transportation. And that connects you right into Center City and University City. So I think there were a few questions I saw in the chat, not just for me, about, will these planned bike paths that you've mentioned within the Bellwether District connect you into the Schuylkill River Trail to get you not just to Center City, Philly, but, Bartram's Garden, John Hines Wildlife Refuge, and many other areas in the region.
So I can take a first shot at that one, and Mia, if I miss anything, you can hop in. But so the one difficult part about having the public trail or an extension with like parks, things of that nature, we do have some covenants and restrictions on the land that we would need to work through third-party approvals and things of that nature before they could ultimately be approved and cleared to be built. I think that what we're looking at with the bike trails and some of the pedestrian assets are a little bit outside of that from a zoning perspective. We do have ongoing conversations with the river, I think it was a DVRC, and we're evaluating how we can potentially get through some of those hurdles. But today, with those restrictions, it's just difficult to commit to any of those things actually being built with finality because it's up to another approval process. But we are working through that actively with a lot of the stakeholders.
So I guess to wrap us up today, and we will definitely follow up with a lot of these questions. There are organized groups like Grays Ferry Neighbors and Philadelphia Thrive, Philly Thrive, who are organized and involved as adjacent community organizations. Are they part of your community board, and how are you specifically working with those groups as you work through the community benefits agreement?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So we have, as I mentioned, a group of 25 registered community organizations and other stakeholders with whom we are having CBA discussions, and we have several groups on that panel or committee that are Grays Ferry RCOs. So I think we're well represented there and working with them closely. In terms of Philly Thrive, we are also actively capturing Philly Thrive's feedback as part of the process. In fact, I have a meeting with them next week on this. So yes, we are engaged with both.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate the time that everyone has taken. You brought a big group of folks here, so I know that's a chunk of time that everyone has committed to this. So thank you so much, Mia, for assembling the team. We will compile some questions and send some more off to you so we can follow up and keep this discussion going, because it is a monumental task that is being undertaken to rebuild a neighborhood in the city, and I know a lot of folks on here are passionate about seeing it be constructed in the most resilient and sustainable way that it possibly can. So we're not swapping old emissions for new emissions. So I will ask folks to turn your cameras on. We do our little virtual round of applause for our speakers. Thank them for taking the time to share with us today. And we will be following up and asking some questions and continuing the conversation. So hope you'll come back and join us again as your progress proceeds.
Thank you so much, everyone. We enjoyed being here today.
And we will be back together August 24th to talk about FDR Park. In the meantime, go down there, check out the Southeast Asian market. I think it's I want to say 10 to 6, it might be 12 to 6. Every Saturday and Sunday, but go check that out because it's a cool thing, and it's a wonderful part of Philadelphia's significant market culture. So we'll be talking about that with Justin Bernardinis, and yeah, have a great Thursday.